When it comes to the all-time classics, the Paper Mario series has been one to get gassed up pretty hard while also suffering from the exact opposite. Yes, it's a series with a notable rise and a colossal fall. So of course, since I'm talking about that, it means I want to take a hefty analysis of the series to see the rise and fall through the games themselves with no outside forces. And as all good things have to start somewhere, we begin with Paper Mario for the Nintendo 64, a game of paper that did not prioritize paper as a gimmick, but rather a background prop, as first and foremost, they made it a single-player RPG and focused heavily on it, putting the gameplay first. So of course, how is it? Well, we're gonna find that one out together the old-fashioned way, meaning yes, bye-bye intro, it's time we dive straight into things, to give this a good old critique. Getting into the weeds of things, the world itself and the overworld gameplay has to be brought into the discussion immediately. As yes, gameplay sure, but it leads to the battling stuff. It's first. So when it comes to the world, the game and story are set in the Mushroom Kingdom, which sets us in the whole Bowser causing massive problems because Peach simply exists land packed with toads, and get this, NPCs that aren't toads. While it's a crazy concept in itself, it's a part of lesser background details when exploring the world, and Mario's ultimate goal of running through the 7 areas to get the 7 things and go fight Bowser. Listen, we'll see the story soon enough, but mentioning it here at least helps set up our main goal, as the game is set up on a chapter-by-chapter basis for both story and gameplay purposes, with each one being a new setting to play through and experience, meaning outside of the main hub, you're pretty much just seeing new scenery for the entire game. We'll be back in a few minutes to babble on about the game's direction and nonsense like that, but as for now, Mario and the overworld gameplay. Mario himself is tasked with wandering about in order to go and essentially hunt down the chapter bosses. Although to reach them, you'll have to deal with loads of space, including generic regular enemies, platforming, exploration, and of course puzzles. Platforming is generally pretty tame and approachable across the board, exploration to get loads of goodies you probably don't need but are greatly appreciated, and puzzles that you could probably handle with your eyes closed. Overall, not too complex, and no real standouts exist here to just hurt the experience, so it's some good stuff. But as for you, to weave your way through it all, Mario is granted the ability to jump, they call him Jumpman for a reason, a hammer to break blocks because he needs it, a spinning option that'll sadly never see the light of day again, being a very small movement tool to help speed up any kind of movement you need, and finally the aid of his many allies from the adventure. The hammer and jump both can even evolve to be better with pickups during the main game, letting Mario break tiles below him or hop slightly higher while doing so for his jump upgrades. And the hammer upgrades just break stronger blocks. Yeah, outside of the super jump's obvious upgrade, the other 3 really just drop the ball in being flashy. Just getting the job done for your progression needs, especially the ultra boots, considering if you need it, you could hypothetically grab it mid chapter 6, but otherwise, the upgrades aren't quite it, but still fine. Thankfully, the partners though pick up a bit of the slack, as each of them, not you, provide something unique to allow you to progress forward. Cooper hitting things from a distance, potentially even grabbing items, Bombette breaking walls, Parakarry taking over gaps that Mario cannot jump across, Bo with some useful invisibility, Watt lighting up the surrounding areas and making some petals actually playable, Sushi with water travel, and of course, Lackluster allowing faster movement that an upgraded spin makes completely irrelevant, and the ability to pass through terrain that Mario simply cannot. Overall, each of the partners, not Goombario, provide something unique to the table to make you do more, and they work pretty well. Although the issue with this system is to use their abilities, you gotta press down on the right stick for my Wii U and Switch gamers. 'Cause you know damn well how impossible it can be to actually use the field abilities, as being forced into a menu is way easier than actually getting the right action. Why game? The controls don't need to be like this. But with that, them's the traits you have. Although that leaves one thing in the back. Actually being able to take damage in uncommon cases. Meaning no way you can actually die if it actually comes down to that. But again, there's not really many circumstances where you're going to take damage in the overworld outside of some lava. It's just here, of course, imploring you to platform. With that said, before we get into the real grass of the gameplay, there's one big glaring thing remaining, and that's the issues with the chapter design. In the context of each one, things are pretty straightforward in terms of what to do for the most part. Where the real negatives show up though is backtracking, of course. It's not that common of an occurrence in this game, but where it is, it's not very desirable. The obvious example is in Chapter 4, as you're constantly bobbing in and out of the toy box. Grab a key, leave. Grab a train, come back, while also just happening to know where exactly to drop it. This totally did not take me an hour my first time playing this when I was young. Enter the toy box again, take the train, get an item, leave, again, on train, cook thing, come back, train again to grab something else, and then guess what, gentlemen? You train again, and you just understand that it's just not very thrilling. Thankfully, Chapter 4 is the one instance of a chapter throwing this at you, although that's not all, as after most chapters, surprisingly not 4, you gotta go back from where you got the Star Spirit to trek all the way back to Toad Town, over long gaps of space you've already handled. Yeah, it's supposed to give you that feeling of experiencing growth since the last time you were here vibe, but man, that ain't no excuse for this. Although at least that does work for Chapter 1, but the others, no, it's just pointless backtracking until you reach a boss fight. Just not being it, especially with Chapter 7. But to only drop the ball a little bit there wouldn't be all, as direction is missing, as after the chapter, the question of where do I even go should typically be showing up. It's not an issue for repeat runs, obviously, but you tell me for a second how it's completely reasonable that a first timer is just going to know to go invisible in this random building to reveal the location of Chapter 4, much less hope they explored enough to get the seeds to even enter Chapter 6. Thankfully, it's straightforward enough to not always be a problem, but again, limited in some cases. But that feeling of just being lost immediately in the few cases where it is just not very pleasant. Again, leaving Mount Rugged, hey look, you immediately see the path to Forever Forest. Good stuff. Again, rare cases of there being an upside. But what is the true upside is the pleasantry that is getting to the gameplay, gamers. Finally, the moment you've all been waiting for, where pressing the A button really begins to pay off. When it comes to the raw mechanics in terms of battling, this is where the game really finds its edge of strength through simplicity. So with the basics first, the battle starts from encounters in the overworld and shifting into the battle scene. Things to note immediately: kill all, that's your goal. Mario has an HP and FP stat, the latter being shared with the teammate, while foes just have HP and an attack per stat that they have, also featuring a defense stat depending on the foe. In the beginning, Mario only has access to a jump attack, hitting the enemy from above, also having a hammer which hits the first grounded enemy. Items, of course, having a separate inventory, while also having the ability to just simply switch attacking orders with their partner, and even special moves that come at later points in the game. The groundwork here is good, although the early game may just end up feeling a little bit mind-numbing, primarily because of how long you'll go without unlocking action commands. Now this feature is where the combat really gets its identity, going from just watching minor cutscenes and dealing with sluggish battles to interactive, skill-based-ish gameplay, allowing your attacks to actually do something. In fact, it's the only way some of them even function at all, while enabling basically all of them to be actual threats. All tied down to that box on screen telling you how to make the attack function properly in the first place for you to get those results and actually win. And while action commands improve your offensive experience, generally making the game more fun, that's not all they do, as you can also guard just about any attack thrown at you in the game with well-timed A presses, cutting your damage taken by one and preventing status conditions from affecting Mario as well, among other things, as well as generally being pretty useful for not shutting down your teammates. Yeah, partners. These are Mario's allies, all of which come with unique movesets. Things setting them apart, however, is a completely different leveling system. We'll have to come back to that later. Their movesets with FP consuming attacks by default. Again, we'll come back to that. They have an inability to use items, and sadly, they have a lack of an HP system. So if they ever take damage, they temporarily get knocked out, get back up after a few turns. All of these traits do, however, come together to make a very valuable extra turn of some kind, but it still makes you need to over-rely on Mario himself because he has, well, everything, like the run command. Meaning, I guess it's time to look at all the other gameplay options, starting with FP, essentially a resource intended to be used for Mario's badge-related attacks and the partner's other attacks, limiting the use of your more powerful options earlier on, but later granting you a much higher FP count, allowing you to spam your more powerful options far more often. Just being basic resource management that's greatly appreciated, as it prevents every battle from just being a complete slaughterfest. The attacks granted to the partner specifically are pretty damn good though, primarily the spread moves being kind of busted, even featuring some really nice support moves. And as for the tattle attack, I mean, I guess basically anyone would hope one of the two methods for revealing enemy health bars would be free to use, because yes, sadly, enemy health bars are hidden otherwise, and for some reason, reoccurring bosses don't like keeping their tattle HP reveal, which, why? Well, that covers it for FP. We're still not out of battle yet, as there's still more. To see that, we'll have to begin with first strikes, as this feature can give you an edge through the overworld itself, because if you hit an enemy out there, it'll start the battle automatically with a first strike for a free damage advantage. While it seems a little extra, the fact that the enemies can also perform first strikes back to you is very thrilling, throwing in a momentum swing of varying degrees to either side of the field, making yet another interactive piece of gameplay that this time ties in the overworld movement to that of the main battles. In terms of a battle mechanic we completely skipped over before, the star power feature grants yet another bit of resource management, but instead of the likes of HP and FP where you get it from simply healing, here you get back some of your meter at the start of every turn, and even getting it back through a command that you can use, which feels like a bit of a mediocre waste of Mario's turn, because again, by default, the partners can't use it. But in return, you get gauges that cap far higher for each chapter that you've beaten to get some pretty powerful attacks. But sadly, these attacks have one downside, being glorified cutscenes, the attacks doing the thing themselves without any input from you, ultimately serving as an excellent way to get your back out from a wall, or just spamming Starstorm to take out loads of enemies at once for star point farming. Wait a minute, what the hell are star points? Well, I'm glad I asked myself that, because now it's time to see that leveling system. Essentially, after every battle, star points can be earned. Collecting 100 allows for a level up, granting a choice of an upgrade for your HP, FP, and the badge limit, increasing by 5, 5, and with badges by 3, capping at 50, 50, and 30 respectively. Star point gain is pretty reasonable, with those yields being set on an enemy by enemy basis, scaling very favorably to the late game enemies. But with heaps of levels under your belt, they'll actually drop less star points as the game goes on, until all enemies proceed to drop nothing at all, because you've essentially maxed out. Overall, a very simple and straightforward leveling system that provides plenty of replayability in itself, but once the badge system gets involved, it goes tenfold. Sadly though, you're not able to adjust your stat points post level up. I mean, technically there is that one-time use you can do, paying money to move 2 level ups from the other 2 stats to one of your choosing, essentially being the closest thing you have to a stat adjustment. Having it is nice, but of course the lack of flexibility and being single use is what's holding it back. But slow down, as those upgrades for the hammer and boots also apply for in battle, not just the overworld. Yes, essentially giving them leveling as well, but not really, as by default, Mario's jump is a 1-to-1 damage output and the hammer is a raw 2. The jump gets 1 extra power per upgrade and the hammer gets 2 per, making them do 4 with supers and 6 with ultras, ultimately letting them do the same damage throughout most spurts of the game, except those points where you actually have the hammer upgrade but not the jump. For damage stacking reasons, not the greatest, as you get the immediately stronger of the 2 options first, and the broken of the 2 that wants investment later, rather than vice versa, making enemy defense less of a struggle than they really need to be. But ultimately, that doesn't matter because of course I'm just nitpicking with this first world problem. So before we talk badges, we gotta slow down again, as partners have a different leveling system entirely, because of course they do. Essentially getting extra damage in a new attack from leveling by hitting these power-up blocks hidden around the world, which help as yet another reason to explore, made even better by the upgrades coming at a choice again, which is better for replayability. 2 upgrades exist, with the latter being made available during Chapter 5, with even more damage and a 4th attack being earned here, giving the partners far more versatility and power, which of course leaves us with the last combat thing, badges. These are skills equipable through a menu, and probably the only thing you're hitting the pause button for, let's be real. Some badges have multiple copies, but the deal with these fellas are, they're granting varying types of bonuses at the cost of your total BP pool, of course being upgraded via level ups. Upgrades include entirely new attacks for Mario, neat bonuses for exploring, extra resource management ups, and way more. If you thought replayability couldn't get better, badges sure as hell make it more possible, alongside the many ways it already existed. Overall, leaving the game's gameplay to be a pretty damn nice across the board, really hitting a good stride just about everywhere here mechanically. But what happens when we actually try to weave the gameplay into the full experience? Well, results are better than you think. In terms of how the gameplay actually throws itself together into a sense of progression is where things get silly and the criticisms can really begin to form. So with the level progression first, it's not too shabby. Obviously, if you want to reach max level, you're gonna have to go out of your way to grind for it, as it should be. But overall, leveling is handled really well to make the time you'll spend worrying about your levels, probably the mid game or late game, not half bad, being short grinding sessions, while the game actually gives you decent resources to 1 round or 2 round most of your grinding sessions. meaning cool, we're not wasting hours just to have number go up, but tens of minutes. All for extra level ups that are not completely game changing, and even at their worst, are still completely playable. In terms of replayability, that's nice and all, but the real carry here is how, excluding the first Bowser fight, essentially being a glorified cutscene, all the game's tutorials are surprisingly skippable. Whether it's equipping badges or using the Star Spirit powers, they're all off the table, meaning less nonsense to bog down the experience, which is obviously valuable in repeat runs, which is a blessing more games genuinely need. Although skippable tutorials do help the game's pacing, the post-chapter section absolutely does not, as after freeing the Star Spirit of a game's chapter, you stop playing as Mario to play as Peach instead to advance the plot, doing a thing of varying degrees depending on which chapter it's in. Chapters 1, 3, and 7, for instance, are very quick and just have talking for the most part, making them non-issues in the grand scheme of things, although something like the game show and the godforsaken cake baking session really do begin to overstay their welcome though. Seriously, why do we have to use an actual timer for this? Stop. Thankfully, there's at least one gameplay piece that manages to tie itself into the Mario stuff here, as Peach can snag items around in the castle and drop them off into a box, so Mario could grab them later, or never because you forget to do so. Generally speaking, it's nice that these sections exist, but man, can they feel not fun to play through sometimes, especially when you just simply want to unga bunga, which I guess leads us to the fellas you're going caveman mode on, I suppose. What, do you want to look at the generic enemies? Well, too bad. It's a pretty solid selection all things considered, which sadly makes it pretty hard to criticize. Hey look, I don't have to sit here and nitpick for negatives. What could I even look for? Quite literally, I'm sitting here grasping at straws just to point out that this game has one less enemy with a defense stat than it probably needs. Oh no. But who cares about generic enemies when the bosses are where things really kick in? So first, let's talk about the main chapter bosses. These guys are pretty fun to fight on average, all playing drastically different to one another. Cooper Bros having a very controlled first phase fight into an absolute mess of a multi-foe second phase, despite being pretty easy to deal with because Koopa. Toot and Koopa brings a weird 2v2 feel with his chain chomp that's absolutely no slouch. Double Blubba himself being invincible should you fight him before the actual boss fight makes him a living jump scare should you somehow get in a fight with him. Meanwhile, the fight with his heart is just very gimmicky, which leads itself into the final fight, which is just kind of free since, you just battle the actual boss. General Guy having multiple phases of his henchmen before you even get to reach the guy with his tank itself, which can be pretty hard to damage sometimes. Lava Piranha being easily the most cheesable boss fight in the entire game, but hits like a truck if you don't make the fight a complete cakewalk though. But of course, leaving the fight there is a little too easy because of course they had to give the second phase. Huff and Puff being a pretty sketchy fight to say the least. Strong DPS alone is threatening, but he even features a unique HP mechanic that essentially turns damage taken into allies that he can heal back off later, being overall a phenomenal fight. Honestly, probably the best in the game. The Crystal King as a boss really punishes failed guards. Pack that in with RNG because of course he needs it, and his summonable buddies for some good measure. Makes for a neat fight, but instant healing is just not fun to play around, ever, as it just stalls the battle longer for no reason, which sadly even plays the final Bowser fight, which isn't the only slowdown this fight even brings to the table, because of course he needs that invincibility proc as well, again, over and over. But otherwise, excluding those parts, the rest of this battle kind of rules. It's just great when these annoyances aren't in the way. And while that covers the main bosses, the optional bosses I'd argue are even less for pushovers. Buzzer is essentially a death sentence if you battle it on your way to Dry Outpost. Can't see Koopa showing that yes, the best offense is a crazy defense backed by an already sketchy offense. Oh, we're just gonna sit here and laugh at these dojo bosses outside of the Master because like, who do these two think they are? But the Master's final form on the other hand, easily one of the single-handed scariest bosses to even fight in the entire game. Good lord, chill out please. But of course, what would you expect from what's essentially the game's super boss? Anti-Guy himself, simply being a regular Shy Guy but with 80 gazillion times more likely to haunt your dreams with this offense. And finally, the Anti-Guy themselves, because if one wasn't enough, try 3 of these bad boys for a real test of skill that Bowser couldn't provide himself. While a few other boss fights do exist, we'll kind of just skip past them because blooper, largest blooper imaginable, red Goomba, blue Goomba, the Lantern Ghost, wait, this guy's actually a unique boss, and a few others of low relevance. See, there's not that much to say on the mini bosses outside of Junior Troopa being a reoccurring boss, as he does everything right, appears many times throughout the game with new abilities to test you every time to adapt to whatever is had here. But of course, for the last fight, it's just everything he had for a perfect finish. What really made the bosses in this game work is how simply fun they were to fight with a sheer lack of repeat bosses outside outside of the bloopers. They all brought something fun to the table, and the limiting of the game's partners and leveling system in general really made your options to fight back limiting in a manner of stronger adaptation being needed, which sadly is what I wish was the case, as your partners recruiting during the chapter really hold the chapter bosses back from shining in particular. And for that, let's look back at the bosses. Tubba's Heart has a dummy strong 2-turn attack, so you pretty much always do this fight with Bo and completely invalidate it, or just die. Watt being immune to General Guy's electric attack while being one of your few options to even hit him in the first place, while General being a massive carry for the Kensu Koopa fight as well. Then of course Sushi exists to simply invalidate Lava Piranha. They just end up making it pretty hard to justify using other partners in the circumstances due to how tailor-made those partners are for those fights. Again, slightly limiting your options by making these far more appealing, and sometimes seeming like the only real answer. Still possible, sure, but stupidly limited. Again, primarily hindering those bosses from the mid-game. But hey, outside of the healing attached to a few of them, the bosses themselves are pretty nice, which can be said about the game itself in general. Surprisingly replayable in most aspects. Battles and enemy variety is fun, the bosses are as well, the tutorials being skippable doesn't plague the game, backtracking itself's not that oppressive, and the Peach segments are either short or have at least that small gameplay thing helping out, and the final best part, the sheer amount of side content we haven't even gotten to yet. Ah yes, gamers, the features that allow the greater world and the game itself to really come into its own. So before getting to the stuff people actually care about, we gotta look at the basics here. Because yes, we have to, it's important to mention, sadly. So let's run through them real quick. As you're playing through the game, you're bound to take damage and burn FP on enemies. So with that, a healing system exists to set you back to 100%, through a free healing block or through a free in. Your worries are put to bed to game once more. These being free is simply a blessing because basic healing costing money is needlessly problematic, as it essentially allows the game to set you up for more dangerous circumstances for no reason, just to get the coins for the heal in the first place. Dousing your door, what the hell? Plus, you want to spend those fat stacks on gear anyways. Basic item shops exist in most towns to buy a large chunk of the game's battle items to get that gameplay edge. And the best part is, each of the shops of course have their own unique offerings. Obviously. But why bother with that when the badge shop gives you a much more permanent gameplay advantage through more badges? Well, that is if you remember to get the calculator back from Shy Guy's toy box, that is. The shop itself rotates its inventory frequently, which is pretty easy to do manually, honestly. The downside here is just a lack of a way to sell badges, but still really nice. Overall, making an economy that's worth indulging in and rewards actually battling enemies long term outside of the leveling system itself. As far as other main town features are concerned, saving is locked down to set save points around the map or tied to an end of chapter story event. Pretty annoying that it's limited like this, but considering how exploitable this game can be, maybe it's better like this. We don't always need complete control and save points. Maybe Pokemon Coliseum was on something. Another basic and useful economy feature, this time at Shooting Star Summit, is that you're able to trade any star pieces you've happened to collect throughout the game for a select roster of badges, plenty of which are rare or impossible to find otherwise, giving strong value to an otherwise rare currency, of course making exploring way more worthwhile. Looking at less valuable town-related, not economy nonsense is cooking. Bring items to Tasty. Yes, these toad names are awesome. You'll get them cooked up for something far more valuable, or drastically worse. Who really knows? There's a hidden system here determining on how these foods are made, you know, if you actually care enough to go crazy with this unique distraction, but hey, pretty useful. To a way more extreme extent of features making things, we have the Little Oink Farm, essentially being a pet farm you can invest in at a cheap-ish cost. Visually, it's something, although that's not the main use. If you drop into their pen, it'll make them all run away, potentially leaving an item behind. Keyword potentially, in a way more convoluted system than that of cooking, but it's still welcome. The Toad Town Dojo exists with one simple goal, giving you extra boss battles to take on, and that's about it. You gotta battle one, get a degree after that to fight the next, and that's about it. It's a fun addition, but most people probably don't even remember it existing, because the sad part is, after you beat the battle, that's it, there's no repeating them, which is a massive bummer. Speaking of stuff people probably don't know exists, the Toad Town Arcade sure is one of those, requiring you to hit this stray tree and needing to do some side quests to unlock the actual mini-games. But yeah, here, mini-games, you get to do these, you get to earn money. Overall, there's 2 mini-games here. The hammer one is easily the worst of the two, granting less value overall, with reward profits that simply just don't cut it. You aim to hit 10 peach panels in 30 seconds while dealing with nonsense to slow you down. It's okay. There's not really much of a reason to ever try it, especially when turning a a profit is what you're trying to do, as the jump minigame excels at that, or making you go bankrupt, as you sit there and hit a bunch of blocks to line up numbers and multipliers to earn coins, instantly failing if Bowser appears. Remember, both games have a 10 coin entry fee, which will likely end in disaster or be insanely bonkers for you should success actually come. Like, this quite literally breaks the economy if you get this correctly. I guess we gotta be glad save states don't exist, right? Easily the winner between the two. The issue is unlocking both the minigames isn't very fun, as you have to do a load of Koopa Koot side quests. Yeah, this fella just has a load of meaningless amounts of side content to indulge in. Plenty of obscure quests just to get cards for the arcade. And of course star pieces, because they have to be here too. It's a neat addition for the content, I guess, but do people even like doing this? Another thing you can do for busy work this time is the mail delivery. With Parakarry at your side, you can deliver letters to the people because clearly he couldn't do it himself. Grab yourself some goodies like star pieces and be on your way. Speaking of no way, there's quizzes you can do to no way get some star pieces for knowing things. Whoa, crazy. But if finding star pieces is too daunting, talking to this person by the funny chest will allow you to find the collectibles you refuse to find by simply brute forcing. Star pieces, upgrade blocks, and badges are all hinted at here, not directly located. Yeah, that's about it. It's helpful, but not mandatory, which is great because of course it costs money. Again, something you probably don't want to use when you're not even guaranteed to find the damn thing. Especially as it loses more and more of its value every single time you repeat runs of the game. Although there is one gameplay thing I refused to mention earlier, the curse. Or something like that. Essentially buying yourself random chances for some game-altering effects. Small chances for stuff like extra damage, you taking less damage, extra XP, or something of the sort. It's a random chance if anything even happens at all, so it's basically like the friendship boost from the Pokemon games. Minus the part where it saps all the fun out of the game. Which leaves us with one last thing. A records list in Mario's house. If you're using this, it's because you want to see the star piece count you have not collected yet. That's why you're here. Don't lie to yourself. Which, of course, is where we leave the features off. Yeah, it's not technically everything, but something like Merlin's guidance, Rip Cheeto's horrific shop, among others, just really aren't worth mentioning due to the lack of impact they have on the game itself. It's enough to warrant mentioning it, but that's about it. Meaning, yes, we finally get to move past all the gameplay shenanigans. With us at that section, you already know the drill. Graphically speaking, this game has held up pretty damn well, all things considered. Probably better than any other Nintendo 64 game for sure. With a lovely art style, which makes the world feel papery, but in a more dusty looking manner, which gives it that old looking kind of charm, and in a way that makes it feel immune to aging. Although two of the developers decided the screen resolution needs to be the way it is, where you have these big black bars on every edge, and it only fills in for the end of chapter, I just want to talk. And musically speaking, it's pretty good. Always adding a nice vibe to literally any point in the game, with area music that hits just right when and wherever you go, and boss music to match the intensities or the general vibes of the fight. Quality sure is up on this one, but in that positive manner that makes it a bit of a treat to listen to from start to finish, being some serious gourmet but to your ears. Anyways, that's about it, so let's just finish off the story and go home. Opening the game with the prologue, Mario and Luigi are invited to Peach's castle for a party. After wandering around for a bit, Mario reaches Peach before everything goes wrong as her castle is lifted up into the atmosphere. Bowser finally shows up for his basic Mario plot moment of kidnapping Peach, the whole castle technically, and thanks to the Star Rod he stole during the game's opening sequence, because of course they hid that from you when storing a new save file. This tool flat out allows him to become invincible, so he's finally able to defeat Mario, and with that, he makes the biggest mistake immediately afterwards, booting Mario out of the airborne castle instead of, just tying him up or something, meaning his plan can actually be stopped. After regaining life, Mario sets off on his adventure, or tries to before immediately getting interrupted by a detour, then dealing immediately with this pain in the rear afterwards. But now, with the block remover in hand, Mario makes one friend and is off to Toad Town to reach Shooting Star Summit like was asked from him from the stars. Mario's got some plot stuff going on, there's There's even a section where Peach and Bowser have nonsense going down, primarily to introduce Twink to the player, essentially being a sidekick for Peach to relay information to Mario. Surprise, that exact thing happens, and with that, we're going straight into Chapter 1. Mario, with his little details from Merlin, has to assist the Koopa village with an outbreak, and by the entire village, I mean quite literally just Cooper, before going off and storming the Koopa Bros fortress, making another friend along the way, reaching the boss fight, and saving one of the Star Spirits. If the summary of this chapter wasn't a bad signal, get used to it, it's a lot of the same. All overly simplistic plot points from here. The game pans to Peach messing around in the castle, ultimately snooping around to eventually hand off information to Mario through Twink. Get used to this as well, because it happens after every chapter, summarizing the Peach segments perfectly to ignore them for the rest of the video. Going off to Chapter 2 not only gets interrupted with a Junior Troopa fight, but even Mario trekking across a desert with an incompetent male Koopa, hitting up some rats in order to get the power to raise the dunes from the sand itself to find Toot and Koopa and lay him to waste. Another Star Spirit attained. It's off to Chapter 3. With one sketchy forest to explore, or get lost in for 40 minutes somehow, you get to visit a very well-kept mansion of booze in order to strike a deal for the Star Spirit they snagged, and with that, Bo tags along to ensure Mario can beat someone who is in fact invincible, which he does after a bit, saving the third Star Spirit, leaving Boo Land behind him, and after beating down Junior Troopa again, leads us back to Toad Town, undergoing a Shy Guy outbreak because social distancing is not something they know about. But thankfully for you, their toy box is where the fourth Star Spirit lies. So after handling the single most worst chapter in terms of backtracking, reuniting people with their stolen goodies, and befriending Watt, Mario breaks the Geneva Convention in order to destroy General Guy's army and save the Star Spirit. Poggers indeed, but congrats, it's Chapter 5 time. After saving a man from digestion, Mario and Colorado, yeah, we've not really seen this guy yet, are off to Mount Lava Lava in order to do the thing, but a fifth time. This time getting interrupted by the Yoshi kids getting lost and you needing to team up with Sushi to rescue them all. And with that good deed behind you, the village chief hooks you up with Thing to Progress, and you're off to go find Raphael the Raven because he's here for some Yoshi's Island fan service. Thanks to his help, you finally get to reach the location for the thing, and oh boy, you already beat the boss. Good job. So with the Star Spirit saved and an artifact trade under your belt, you're hopefully able to progress to Flower Fields. Well, that's of course after your Junior Troopa fight, don't be silly. Chapter 6 is pretty simple, all things considered. Gathering items to make a beanstalk through helping all these weird flowers have their problems solved. Like really, did you need a trade for an item? Come on now. Before also clearing out the clouds from the skies above while running one way and running the other non-stop back and forth very frequently. You get to recruit a goofball and good job not having a skill issue doing the thing, by the way. And with that, Chapter 7. After going off in this building that you definitely forgot about in order to progress the game, Mario pops into Shiver City only to get blamed for murdering the mayor. After some footwork, it turns out he didn't die and just got knocked unconscious, meaning it's off to fight Junior Troopa again, and he fails as always. It's his canon event. Regardless, with him down, it allows us to follow the path to some seemingly irrelevant town to get Thing to progress towards the Crystal Palace, after you backtrack, that is. And after some run-ins with some Duplighosts, Mario solves the puzzles to the palace because of course he does, reaching the Crystal King to win and get the last Star Spirit. Cool, back to Shooting Star Summit you go, to reach Star Haven to finally take the fight to Bowser in Chapter 8. So after trekking through Bowser's castle and getting a surprise rematch with the Koopa Bros, you wish that was the case, it's just Junior Troopa again, Peach's castle is finally reached, bringing the game to the final fight with Bowser. And by final, I mean the first non-tutorial fight with him, because of course there's another. But with that, the real battle begins. Things are all cool until Bowser becomes invincible, because of course his invincibility is being powered even further thanks to the arena alongside the Star Rod itself. So with Mario at a stalemate, Peach has Twink lay a beating on Kammy Koopa before having the craziest idea to just wish Mario more power to defeat Bowser. So now of course, it's time to win, after he's done healing himself, that is. And with that, Mario defeats an invincible Bowser. Things go down, all's well that ends well, finally sending the game off with a post-story party resembling that of the intro before the parade and the credits, leaving us with that final ending shot that you'll inevitably have to close the game out of because there's no save point here, just eternity. But yeah, as stated earlier, another Mario saves Peach from Bowser's story, but this time paper, meaning all around the story's not that impressive, like at all. But at least there's some stuff to keep it interesting. So before moving on, I guess we gotta take a quick look at the characters. While the game's humor itself is actually contained pretty well to not overtake the entire experience, while just being pretty solid in its own right when the moments occur, it leaves the game to be a little bit enjoyable when the funny moments happen. But man, the characters are not doing that good of a job at trying to play into that. Mario, obviously being a silent protagonist, does not help much, but the partners having nothing really going for them surely is not helping matters out either. Like once they join you, their dialogue, especially after their recruitment chapter, hardly even exists, which really hurts them due to them just being very bland after recruiting them, which of course brings them to having no character moments for the rest of the game, which is why the whole Duplighost impersonating your allies thing doesn't really work. The investment in the characters doesn't really exist due to stuff like having a lacking personality, and most importantly, just not having enough dialogue. Yes, the ending with them does work, but like, not much. Looking at the other characters, the rest are just kind of, they work, with Bowser of course being the big highlight, just generally being very silly while not being a slouch in the threat department. And as for the other important character, oh wow guys, look, Peach is a damsel in distress, but she's brave in doing things. That's cool, we like that. Also, Colorado, one of the not Mario, Peach, or Bowser characters to actually be good. Almost like he works because they gave him an entire chapter. But yeah, that's about it for the story department for Paper Mario. It's just kind of there and nothing else. Meaning it's time to wrap up or fold up this adventure. Ugh, that was so unfunny. Actively one of the worst jokes of all time. At the end of the line, Paper Mario was and is a pretty solid RPG, all things considered. An RPG that truly stood the test of time, for the most part, being the ultimate gateway drug for those wanting to touch the genre, as it was just generally a great RPG introductory game, while being pretty good in its own right that was not needlessly long. It offers fun interactive gameplay, some of that Mario platforming love, challenge to an extent, nice amount of replayability, and of course a story you could comprehend with your eyes closed. Strength in simplicity. Everything just works and it works well. So much to the point where only having one true sequel just hurts granted the series' potential. But that's an unrelated tangent that we've heard 1 billion times over at this point. And it's hypothetical talk, which I find foul. So let's ignore that and round this out. I gotta be blunt, it's a 4 out of 5 star game. Plenty of highs and a sheer lack of lows. Only making you wish that there was more. And for that question of playing the game at all, yeah, you should play it. It's one of the easiest yeses I've had a handout thus far. So much of the game just manages to snowball into this big blob of fun. And if being good wasn't enough, the game thankfully can be played relatively easy due to not being stuck on the N64 via ports, and most importantly, also not having remakes or sequels that directly outclass the game and kill any need to even play it to begin with. And of course, that leaves us with the narrator's thoughts and opinions for the game outside of the vacuum. And here, of course, I adore the game. While I would say its sequel's the more superior game, that doesn't mean squat when it comes to actually going back and playing them. Where replayability might be more limited here, I just find this game generally more fun, primarily due to the harder bosses and item management. I just really appreciate the game's offering in a way that really can't be matched. Just a very pleasant time and I love it. Anyways fellas, that just about does it for me today. And as for a start of our retrospective of the Paper Mario games, it's exactly what you'd hope for in a game, especially the first one. Although technically it's a follow-up to a different one. But yeah, we start high. And as for the question of how you top that game with a sequel, well, you just have to stay tuned for that one. So as always, thank you for watching. I appreciate it as always, especially with this not so pivot from Pokemon, because this little thing called branching out, seriously, there's only so many Pokemon games. What do you expect me to do? Just make one and then talk about the same game 3 years later and then the same game 5 years later? Like, come on now. And until next time, can you please chill out with the instant healing and invincibility so I can power bounce you to oblivion?